Okay, ladies and gents, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric. And today I'm joined by an old friend, an old colleague, Jeni Lindstrom. Jeni, thanks for being on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Of course, thanks for being here. So Jeni worked at my department, Kent PD, a number of years ago, and for a number of years. But not only was she a police officer, she is currently a firefighter. And previously, this just popped in my mind, but she was a dispatcher. So when we talk about first responder world and the different vocations, I thought it would be amazing to get her on just to talk about her experiences in police and fire, hiring stuff, just acclimating to the job, and then changing seats in a different first responder world, or role in the world. And so now we actually have three friend of mine that we're going to be highlighting and talking through. So let's just dive into it. Jeni, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm in the middle of a long stretch of time off, so relaxing, enjoying, and spending time with some friends and family.
Which is a lot easier in the fire world, in the fire service, to have these long stints of time, yeah?
It is. I work usually 9 to 11 days a month, give or take, so taking a shift off gives me a large chunk of time off, which I'm not mad about.
Yeah, so that's largely I'm not strong at math, which is why I became a cop. But what is it, like roughly a third of the month that you're working?
Yes, yeah. I mean, the difference is, of course, that I'm working 24 or 48-hour shifts instead of, 10 to 17, but,
yeah. I love to joke. I can't not joke about it. How is the pace of your department, though?
We're a fairly busy department. Like most departments, we run the majority of medical calls. We do pop a lot of good fires and accidents and that kind of stuff. And we're mutual aid for some surrounding agencies like Olympia and West Thurston and some other places. So we're fairly busy, but it's definitely not, it's not Kent PD paced for certain.
Or Puget Sound Fire. I feel like Puget sounds like, we were waking them up all the time, and I don't mean that like disparaging or like to mess with them, but no, there's a lot of calls where you need aid or you need services or something that the fire department is going to handle, or dangerous calls where you need fire to stage because a victim might need it, we might need it, all that very serious stuff. So as much as I like to joke like any other cop, well appreciated. We love our brothers and sisters in red.
I actually I'm going to put this story out here in the beginning because you're talking about the police and fire aspect. We were on a mutual aid fire with Olympia, and I was standing there talking to my lieutenant, and we're kind of wrapping up, and one of the Olympia firefighters comes up to me with a box of donuts, and he goes, you're the cop, you'll like this. And I'm like,
yeah,
I appreciate you, sir. I'll take one of those things.
Yeah. Who doesn't like a good donut?
Right?
Just in moderation, right?
Of course.
Yeah, I like having the great dynamic that we have, especially when you have a more busy agency. So as much as I like clown, I do not envy those in a more busy department that are fire that work 24s, 48s, 72s. Just think about when you're interrupted in the middle of your sleep cycle, like how groggy you feel, just as an average person, right? And so to think about that being part of regular life, I think as a young man, I thought, yeah, why not, right? It's like you pick your poison, but in my late 30s, I don't know how resilient I'd be doing that. I do like having some semi-regular sleep schedule for sure.
Yeah, I will say that was one thing that I didn't realize was going to take as much of a toll as anything else. But, we're lucky at my department that we are not allowed to work more than 48 hours in a row without a 12-hour break. And that is because of that reason. If you have a really busy night, like I had one night where we had 19 calls after 8 p.m., we're not sleeping. And then you're working a whole 24 hours after that. It's just not safe at that point. Yeah. So there is a lot of, when I come home from shift, people are like, oh, what do you do? Are you getting your stuff done? I'm like, I am napping. I am napping for a couple hours, and then I'll get up and start my day. So yeah, the interrupted sleep is definitely a difficult part of it.
Yeah, so we did a sneak peek to your hat trick of emergency response, and then another little sneak peek. It's not just fire, but you're going through paramedic school.
Yeah, I am just started my prerequisite classes for that. So hopefully, I haven't decided. I've got some pretty big family trips planned. So hopefully 2024, 2025, I'll go through paramedic school and we'll get to go down that route and kind of follow my older sister's footsteps, which I'm super excited about.
Yeah, well, very cool. So we're going to rewind and do a little chronology. But what brought you into interest in first responder world, and what got you into dispatch/call receiving?
That's funny. So when I was a kid, we had this problem house on the end of my street, and the cops would be there. It felt like all the time as a kid. They'd show up with the cars, flashy lights, canines in their uniforms. And I was like, that is what I'm going to do when I grow up. And when I graduated high school, I started applying to be a police officer. Well, I was 18 years old at the time, and you can't do that. I actually have my very first rejection letter from Honolulu PD, of all places, because who doesn't want to be a cop in the sunshine?
Yeah.
And so I had talked to my sister, who was a paramedic at the time, and she said to look into 911 dispatch. It would get my foot in the door secretly.
Yeah.
She was hoping that I would go into the fire world.
Okay.
And if you asked me back then, I would tell you 100% no. I will never do that. Fire is not my jam. But I did look into it, and I took a course at Renton Technical College for emergency dispatch and started applying. And I got picked up by a smaller agency that served both a police department and a fire department. And I got hired at 19, which to me sounds crazy. But I spent the next almost 9 years there dispatching for, call taking, dispatching for both police and fire.
Yeah. What were some of the unforeseen challenges of dispatch life?
Having conversations with people face to face is very different than having those conversations over the phone. Especially when you have somebody who is stressed out or having a difficult situation, or, just in this crisis. You can't reason or work with them as easily as you can in person. And so it was very difficult learning different skill sets to talk to somebody over the phone as opposed to doing it in person. So I think that was one of the unforeseen difficulties for me, is just having to kind of cater those conversations a little bit differently.
Yeah. Do you have any tips even for patrol officers that only have a phone line? There's no face-to-face, there's no visual. You can't get that electric connection in front of someone where you're reading their energy.
I think it's just a little bit of reading the scenario, right? Some people, if they're in those stressful situations, need to vent and kind of brain dump all of that information at first. And then there's that pause that you can start that conversation. And you have to remember, it's not all of what they're saying has nothing to do with you, right? They're not, they may be angry at the situation, but they're not angry at you as a person. So remembering not to take that stuff personal, waiting for those breaks and pauses. And if they're yelling and you're yelling, it's not going to work. So give it a second, take a breath, talk in a lower tone. All those things are super helpful with distressed callers on the other end of the line.
Yeah, that's huge. And it's a good reminder because it translates to every type of communication, really. If you think about, you could apply it to patrol officers. I think the new officers, but really I could use those reminders throughout my career where I got super impatient. Someone's dumping their frustrations, and usually it starts from 2 years ago, right? And then oftentimes as a patrol cop, you're like, okay, hold on, right? You're interrupting the diatribe, as they say in academy, but you're like, tell me about today. And sometimes it's hard, right? There is that push-pull, and we need the pertinent information now because we need PC now, maybe the person, probable cause for those that aren't familiar listening in, but maybe the person's leaving and we need to know whether we can stop them or not. And so you try to interrupt at the same time. You got to recognize that it's a lot. Emotions are extremely high. They're the highest by the time police emergency services are involved. It's not a great day.
No, it's definitely not. And you really have to find that balance, because as first responders, like you said, we want particular information and we want it in an order and a very timely fashion. And you don't always get it that way. Sometimes we have to interject, but there are times where you can just let them kind of brain dump. And a lot of that information, those questions that you're asking, are going to come out in that conversation.
Yeah.
So it's just really finding that balance.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so you did 9 years in dispatch
Mm-hmm.
on the call line, and you wanted to be a cop from a young age. And then,
Yeah.
so 9 years later, you get into the police service.
Yeah, I think I got to a point where in dispatch, I felt like I had done all that I could do. I didn't want to be a supervisor. I didn't want to be a manager. So I kind of reached that point of like, I feel like I've done a lot of what I came here to do. And, I'm old enough now to do the cop thing. And I feel like I've got a great solid foundation and background. So why not make the jump? This was probably almost 11-ish years ago now. So at that time, everybody wanted to be a cop. So I had put an application in with public safety testing, and I think I waited probably 6 or 8 months before I got a call from Kent PD saying, hey, we want to put you in the process.
Things are different now, guys and
Yeah.
gals. Yeah.
That's what I said.
You
It was
can't
like,
sleep on it in today's hiring climate.
yeah, it was a way different game back then. But, and yeah, so I went through the whole process with Kent. I had never been to the city of Kent before. I didn't know anything about it. I'd done my research. I kind of drove around when I got that call, but yeah, so went into that process. And I think having that 911 dispatch background, as far as like computer work and talking on the radio and kind of some, lingo and stuff was all already second nature for me.
Yeah.
I said before that I don't know if I would have been as successful in FTO as I was if I hadn't have had the background, because it just took that stressor off my plate.
For sure.
So yeah, then I got hired there, and I spent just over 5 years there before I made the change. So
yeah. Okay. To rewind back a little bit, in dispatch world, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, but a big thing for me is wellness, right? Like blue grit wellness, but truly for first responders, like the mental and physical aspects that we can try to curb and control to help promote our wellness in our job, in our life. Was fitness always a thing for you? Because you were always a fit cop when I knew you. You're clearly a fit firefighter. You're one of those that always knew that I always had the confidence you could handle business, which is not, sadly, for all cops or all firefighters. Mm-hmm. Now, was that the case for you as far as maintaining that in dispatch, or is that something that you grew into?
It was kind of twofold. In the dispatch world, I was pretty interested into CrossFit. I know people don't necessarily love talking about that, but that was kind of my intro.
CrossFit people do love talking about that. That's my one CrossFit joke. I love a lot about CrossFit, and I'll leave it there.
Yeah, but it really got me into lifting and kind of endurance work. And so that's kind of where my love for that started. But it also was a really good outlet for me. Yeah. You'd have those stressful shifts or stressful days or calls, and the gym was always a place where I could go and put my music on, listen to whatever, and just put the work in. And so it did as much for me physically as it did for me mentally. And I think just throughout the years, I've always kept that up. It's always been a good de-stressor for me, kind of recenters me, puts me back in that good headspace. And then moving into the police world, policing can be a very physical task, and also being a female, I, was 5 foot, I'm still 5'4".
Good. You haven't shrunk or grown dramatically, which would be more weird.
Yeah, I know. Right. So 5'4", I'm not the tallest of females. And, while I was strong, you still have to do things a little bit differently. So making sure that I always had that base foundation for anything that I did was super important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So on that note, is there anything that comes to mind when you said do things differently? Like you're strong, you have good cardio base, but anything else come to mind?
Yeah. So I worked with a partner that was 6'5", and he had brute strength.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. He had brute strength. He could just walk over to somebody, pick him up, and do whatever he needed to do. Being 5'4", I may be strong, but I really had to practice my tactics. Mm-hmm. I really had to focus on that, and the tactics were what got me through. The skill set and all of that, like the strength was a great portion of it, but if I had great tactics and great skill set in fighting and takedowns and all that kind of stuff, I was super successful. I didn't need that brute strength because I had the skill set.
Yeah. Yeah. It just comes down to skill, technique, leverage, right? And
very much so.
That's where, my 135-pound professor coach in jiu-jitsu can just absolutely manhandle me. With me going as hard as I can, right? And
Yeah.
it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter because the skill is just so, and he's super fit, of course, but yeah, the skill is off the charts. Okay, and then as far as dispatch, another thing I want to talk about is I feel like dispatch is frequently forgotten. And I love that. I love that we talked about how you developed all these skills that are helpful for police work, but frequently forgotten in the wellness space. In that, as we're growing peer support, as we're growing debriefing and talking about what happened, dispatch is on the line and then they're not, right? And then they're on, or the call receiver's on the line and then they're not, right? And then the dispatcher is on the radio, and then once the call is cleared, oftentimes there's just no resolution, right?
Yeah.
What was that like, and what do you think that we could do as a culture, fire or police, to kind of keep them looped in or help them out, fill those blanks?
That's a super good question. I know as a cop, I always made it a point to bring new cops down to dispatch, right? It's a whole different world. It's this big space where everybody has a desk, everybody's handling stuff, and remembering that the dispatcher you're working with is not just working with you, right? Mm-hmm. They're working with every single one of your partners on every single one of their calls. So their ability to multitask and move through calls and make sure to not forget anything is unmatched. But at the end of the day, they only get as much information as you tell them or they hear. So when I was at Kent, I had a really great relationship with the dispatchers. So they would message me, hey, what happened with that call? I was able to, give them a phone call or stop by and kind of give them the extra information. Mm-hmm. But just remembering that they don't get the whole picture. So a lot of times if they're left with a pretty gruesome call or scene, that's all they get from it. They don't get the resolution. They don't get, maybe what we found or what we did or just the end result. So just remembering to keep them looped in and to give them kind of those answers, because they only get one small piece of that story.
Yeah, I think that's a great kind of low-hanging fruit, right? And sometimes they're curious, and I remember certain officers and myself, right, like where you're just busy, right? And you're like, oh man, I got this message and I'm trying not to deal with this. And also, how much are you going to put in a message? But if you make a little intention, maybe a quick phone call, it certainly couldn't hurt, because we often imagine the worst when we're not there. And we can think about that for ourselves. If we know, like, take whether you're a first responder or not, think about, you get this cryptic information that your family's involved in a wreck, and you're going to imagine the worst, right? You're going to be worried, and you don't get information, then it's going to compound, right?
Yeah.
I've experienced that doing critical incident stress debriefs as part of peer support, where we're talking about a really gruesome scene. I'm not saying it's not gruesome, but I was picturing a really bad situation, and I'm hearing the voices of my officers and peers, and I'm hit a certain way, even though I'm nowhere near that, right? That's a week ago. I was never there. I didn't see the things. I didn't read the report, but I'm hearing the descriptions, and I'm imagining quite this, jarring scene. And so I can only imagine what it's like getting that day in, day out, on the phone or on the radio, where you don't have any eyes on the thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a difficult piece to it. And, with dispatchers, they deal with, what you're talking about is really secondary trauma, right? You're not there for it, but you're hearing about it from other people and people that you have built these relationships with and trust. And so it's really great to keep them in the loop and just remember that there is a whole subset of, a whole different group of people that are hearing portions of this, that if they could close the loop would probably help them process that and kind of move forward. And then also remembering too, your dispatchers are your lifeline.
Yeah.
I remember a time I had a guy that had stopped a car when I was a dispatcher. He had stopped a car and he had ended his radio traffic really awkwardly. It was not normal for him. I picked up on it and I was like, this just isn't right. And keying up, trying to check his status. He's not responding. I'm starting other officers there because it's just not normal, right? He didn't say anything's wrong, but it's just something feels weird. And lo and behold, he was fighting this guy, had gotten in a foot pursuit and fought this guy. And if it wasn't just for that little spidey sense or me as a dispatcher going, that's just not normal for my guys, he could have been fighting out there for who knows how long. Yeah. So just remembering that they pick up on all those little things and they really are your lifeline in that respect.
Yeah, I love that because it's just a reminder that it's a team sport. And I think that The old school was like, oh yeah, one officer calls and you just go handle it. But now smartly, we apply. Yeah, it takes more people to affect different options to de-escalate and all these things that we're talking about, tactics, which is just good strategy. But also not just your field officers, but those behind the scenes, right? They're very much on the front lines, dealing with the situation in a contemporary way, but they're just not right there. They're there, but they're not, right?
Yeah.
So let's not forget. Shout out to the dispatchers and call receivers that make all this possible. I think the last question I have with dispatch is, we talk about wellness, and I recognize so much when I mean, even on the street, it's hard for a lot of people to build some sort of wellness routine in uniform. More people are working on duty, which is fantastic, and more departments are supporting that. But dispatch call receivers, they're stuck at a desk. Maybe they have a stand-up desk, but standing's the new sitting, and it's still somewhat immobile, right? As a fitness aficionado, do you have any thoughts, being in that world and what might be more helpful for that culture, recognizing that they are stuck there to a huge degree?
Yeah, they're stuck there, at a desk 10, 12, 15 hours a day, usually tethered to a desk. Sometimes you get a headset that is, wireless, but you can only go so far.
Yeah.
So they're also dealing too with, being understaffed and working overtime, like every kind of public safety agency can be.
Yeah.
But I think just it would be awesome if in a perfect world, they would get the time and, an hour a day or so to step away, decompress, to be able to work out during shift, to be able to utilize that time in a positive manner. It would help, like we talked about, both physically and mentally for whatever it is that they're dealing with. It helps you process things. In a perfect world, that would be ideal. Otherwise, it's really, you just got to be intentional about it.
Mm-hmm.
Working shifts and shift work and overtime, you can be super tired and just kind of dragging, but remembering my mental health, my well-being is worth it. And knowing that if you don't help yourself, it's really hard for you to keep helping other people. So in a perfect world, them being able to get that time on shift would be great. Otherwise, it just takes a lot of being intentional and reminding yourself that you're worth putting in that effort.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect world, I think things like walking desks would be great for case detectives, for dispatchers, for administrators, maybe a pull-up bar over there in the corner, maybe a little kettlebell, right? You could do something. And then, I think we forget about food, right? People make a lot of, and I don't want to say excuses in this way because it is limited at night if you're working shift work and you work graves. But dispatchers and corrections officers really have way more limitations than, let's say, a patrol officer. Like a patrol officer can go, across the city to the one grocery store that's open 24/7, and you can get some sandwich meat, you can get some fruit, maybe you can get a rotisserie chicken, and have at that. But there's some, better food options. Whereas if you're in a prison or a jail or a dispatch center, which is basically locked down for good reasons, you really are stuck. And so meal prep can be hard. And so, man, I feel like if departments and organizations got more partnerships and just facilitation so they have these healthy options there, maybe some meal prep, frozen meals, maybe it's part of the budget. If you really want to take care of your people and have them be happy, healthy workers and effective, optimized, responders, then, that would be amazing.
Yeah. Or, most places have vending machines. Slightly change what you put in there. Give them the option to have, those healthy options instead of, Pop-Tarts and all of the rest of the things. Not saying a Pop-Tart isn't a good thing every once in a while, but give them the ability to make those, better choices if they have to.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. All right. So let's pivot over to police. You got into police. You'd already been into CrossFit. That helped. Clearly, the dispatch work and radio proficiency was very helpful. I know that's a very common issue for new officers to be hearing something, and that myth of multitasking, right? We can only really do one thing at a time, but to get acclimated to talking to someone in front of you and then pause because you have to listen to this very important, critical information in your ear. Yeah. What other recommendations or things would you advise someone to keep in mind that were helpful for you as you made the transition?
I think getting out there and talking to people is a huge one. I think we have a pretty big emphasis on social media and internet conversations and that kind of stuff, but there's no replacement for just getting out there and having conversations with people. It's getting comfortable asking hard questions and, sometimes slightly embarrassing questions that you might not want to ask. Maybe not say don't ask the general public those questions, but get comfortable doing those things.
Yeah.
Put yourself in places where you're making those relationships and building that rapport, because that will directly translate to talking to a victim or a suspect. I think for me, that was probably the biggest one was getting comfortable, because I had that base knowledge. I could focus slightly on other things.
Mm-hmm.
And then just remember, you have your own pace as well, right? Yes, there are benchmarks and stuff that they want you to meet at certain times, but don't push yourself too far too fast, right? Don't outdrive your means. Don't outshoot your means. Don't do that. Go within your means and build that skill set so you can, kind of gradually get better and better and better at it.
Yeah, definitely words of wisdom from a prior field training officer. So you saw it, and it's something we talk a lot about generationally. I don't know how. I'm assuming this translates into the fire service as well, but yeah, with this the young kids, right? No, but it was already with our generation, and then it's just gotten more significant, I suppose. But with interpersonal communication, you cite devices and internet and electronic communication, but we have seen, and a lot of people that are generations prior to me have seen this increased challenge with new candidates having the face-to-face conversations, right? These in-person just don't know how to talk to people is the phrase, right?
Yeah. And I think remembering too that yes, you are wearing a uniform, you are a police officer, you are in a position of authority, but you're a person too. So find those things that you can relate to those people about, have those conversations as you would, outside of uniform, be personable, be able to relate to their situation. You may never have been in it before, but be relatable in that aspect. Kind of put yourself in their shoes and be like, oh, that really is, to me, this person is calling 911 and it might not be a big deal, but to them, this is the biggest deal they've dealt with today. And just remembering that fact that this could be their worst day, might be your normal Tuesday, but it could be the worst day for them.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say are some of your favorite experiences from, it could be broad, but from police work, and then the things that you do not miss?
Oh, man. I think the camaraderie is, it is, I have that in the fire service. It was just different in the police world, right? We could pull up to a location, car to car, get a hot call, take off, and we're running. And I think there's something that is just unmatched when it comes to that kind of camaraderie, where you are, going 100 miles an hour, doing the things, hanging with the guys, and just, I don't want to say, it was a good time, bad time for other people, but it was a really good time for us. And those are relationships and experiences that you build on, and friendships that you have for, forever.
Yeah.
I do miss being able to get into my own patrol car and drive wherever I want to go, whenever I want to go. It's a little bit different in the fire side of it, right? We're kind of home based out of our station, and we get in the engine as a group of three, and 3 or 4 people, and we go and handle business and we come back. So there was a little bit more freedom. And there is nothing like getting in a police chase. I miss that too.
Some newer officers barely know, or maybe still don't know what that's like. But
that's right. And I keep forgetting that so many things have changed since I left. Yeah.
Yeah, it's rapidly evolving.
So I think that, and then the training that we went through, I feel like was unmatched. I think that Kent PD was really great in putting together a lot of training, and that was a huge focus. If I came in one day and said, hey, I'm just feeling a little off on this, cool, we'll make a training of it. We'll run us through something. We'll get you comfortable with it, and we'll move on. And I really loved that aspect of it. If the person or sergeant or officer I was talking to didn't know how or was unsure, they would point me in the right direction, and somewhere at that department, I could find exactly what it was I needed. Yeah. So that was a super cool thing. And I never once felt like I was going into a situation really unprepared. right? You never know what you're getting into, but I felt like I was prepared to deal with just about anything.
Yeah. Well, that was an unsolicited plug for Kent PD. So thank you for that. There were no kickbacks for that, boys and girls. No, but I think that it does speak something to resources and the people you have, right? And I like to think it's more of a culture thing than a resource thing, because smaller departments, and maybe they say, well, we don't have a huge training budget. But even what I hear you saying, what I'm picturing in my mind is so much less about budget. It's just about the ownership and the transparency just in the team to like, hey, let's talk about that. Let's remove the ego. That could be literally the next shift briefing, like the roll call, start of day, saying, hey, I went to this call, got really confounded, and then it got really hectic. And this is what maybe me and my partner are telling the rest of the crew about that. And everyone kind of chimes in, oh yeah, like, let's talk about that. Or maybe you see a cool video online and you're like, ooh, this is not exactly how I'd like to do it, but I'm going to bring it to the crew. And let's say, how are we going to do this as X department? How would we run it with the people sitting here if we had the ability to kind of plan it a little more? So just to throw that learner's cap on from everyone from new officer to sergeant in the room or even beyond, I think that's a culture thing.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot you can do with tabletopping things, right?
Yeah.
You can talk about a scenario. I did this a lot as a dispatcher, which I guess kind of translated into the other two professions. But if there was a call that was going on in a different agency, you listen to the radio traffic, you hear about it, and then you tabletop it to how you would do it at your agency. Because building that muscle memory is amazing. Because when that incident happens and your brain goes, oh, hey, I've dealt with this before, it may have just been in that tabletop scenario, but you know how to act and respond to it. So it doesn't catch you off guard. There isn't that, couple second lag. You've talked about it, you've gone over options, and now you get to put it into play. And I think the more you do that, the better base foundation you build and the better you're going to be moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for that. As we transition over to the next section, I talk about wellness a lot, and although a lot of my passion project is about bringing in more cops, it is the realness of wellness and mental health awareness and just navigating a career well, whether that's, and I said it many times, I've written it many times, whether it's a 5-year career or whether it's 25 or 30, right? And so I want to talk about, after, young Jeni Lindstrom was wanting to be a cop for so many years, and then you're in the seat, you're a very successful officer, you're a field trainer, which is, that's kind of the resume to keep on fire and doing things. And I know the answer largely, but yeah, let's talk about what changed for you and what prompted the transition to fire.
Yeah, like I said before, fire was never what I thought I would end up doing. And if you would have asked me 10 years ago, like I said, I would say never, not a chance, not happening. But things change. So one of the bigger catalysts for me was losing Diego in the line of duty. I was one of the first on scene to that. So that was a pretty difficult incident to go through. You see it happen at other agencies and across the country, and you never think it's going to happen at your home agency on your shift to someone you know and love. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that's kind of where I had a little bit of shift in mindset. We kind of touched a little bit about peer support. I think there was some trauma that I didn't quite process, probably from some previous stuff and home stuff and whatnot. And I think this just kind of compounded on top of there. And I did really get into a place where I'm like, this is a little dark place and I am not happy here. But also, I didn't really think it was all that okay to talk about initially. And there's kind of that culture, that stigma that, just keep pushing forward. It'll be fine. You'll get better. It'll go away. And when it didn't, I got to a place where I'm like, okay, I need some help with something. And I think I had probably a month and a half of time after we lost Diego where I was off work before I felt like I could come back. And that was the time that I kind of branched out and I talked to my sister a little bit and said, hey, I'm really struggling here. I don't know if I can go back and continue to do this job. Mm-hmm. And I give her big props. And then Chaplain Pat Ellis, huge props for this, because I went to him and confided in him and said, I'm not okay. And he was awesome and got me in touch with a therapist that sadly didn't have a really great response to that first time around. And I was like, okay, well, maybe this is just something that I can, put in my backpack and carry around. It'll be fine. It'll go away and it's not going to be a big deal. Until, like I said, it just didn't go away. Mm-hmm. And so back at Chaplain Pat, and he put me in touch with another therapist who was amazing. She had done 30 years in law enforcement and was a therapist now. And so I was able to open up and confide, and she understood, the culture, how things were, some of that anxiety about going back to work. And I was able to kind of start working through some of that stuff. The kind of change piece, I made it back to work. I was there for probably another year before I decided to transition out. And I just struggled with the anxiety of knowing that could happen again. Mm-hmm. And it could be me, it could be another person that I loved and cared for. And my hesitancy on calls, I didn't want to affect other officers. I didn't want to be the reason that may happen again. And so I had to really look in the mirror and say, can I do this for the next 20 years? Yes, I can. But am I going to be mentally healthy and happy at the end of it? I don't know. With how it's going, probably not. So I talked to my sister, who, like I said, was still is a paramedic. She's an assistant chief now, actually, but was a paramedic at the time. And she said, hey, I know I've pushed this for 13 years now, but maybe look into the fire service. You still get that public safety, first responder portion of it. It's just different than where you're at.
Yeah.
And I listened and, I kind of looked into it. I talked to a couple of the Puget Sound fire guys and had run a couple of calls with them and really saw what it was that they did. And I thought, okay, I'll give it a shot. I'll think about it. And the more I talked to people and the more I kind of figured out what it was they actually did for work, the medical calls, the helping and all of that, I was like, okay, we'll see. So I applied to be a firefighter. It was a very difficult decision, right? I didn't want to leave my people. I didn't want to leave the department I'd grown to love. I was successful. I was happy, but I knew at that time I needed to make a change. And I ended up getting hired at Tumwater Fire, which I was super, super stoked about. And I've been here now for the past 5 years, and it's been the change I didn't know I needed, and I'm super happy I made it. I can't say enough good things. It was a very difficult decision. I don't regret it, but I'm glad I was able to be honest with myself and say, hey, I need a change. Let's do it and let's go.
Yeah. Well, thank you for so much. I'm not going to hit all the things I'm thankful for. I'll try, but one, I want to thank you for your courage in not just talking about this. I mean, largely your decision, right? It's not easy to change anything. It's not easy to change identity and change roles and change hats. It's not easy to face the music. It's not easy to talk to someone, a professional or multiple. It's a theme that I try to cover a lot, which is a lot of people, you hear it about personal, therapy or, couples counseling. Oh, I tried that, right? And then you just kind of write it off. But man, what would that be like if you had just tried the first one and it didn't gel and you didn't meet the second one? That was so instrumental for your recuperation and your healing. I'm thankful for the day. I've told the story numerous times where, talking about the night Diego died, but how I was working at the showware. And I think you were actually the person I messaged where I was like, well, hope it doesn't get too crazy. I don't even remember what I wrote on MDC, but I think I typed you hey, be safe. I'm out of here. And it was 10 p.m. or something. And I was just trying to get home. And it wasn't until hours later that, everything happened. But I thank you. I appreciate you for being there. For everyone that was there, doing everything they could, for Diego, for Mark, for not being there. That's a survivor's guilt thing that I've talked about before too. And you just kind of wish you were there, but you weren't, but you trust the people that were there. And when I heard about all the efforts that went on, my heart went out, for all of you, my team and the people I love and care about. So, I thank you for the day, but, just to, kind of pan back. Yeah. Just for your development, just recognizing, for as much as I talk about it, yeah, it's not going to be a 30-year career for anyone or for everyone, and probably not for most. And that's okay. That's the opposite of okay. That's great, right? And I think that we have to recognize that different people are going to be affected different ways. I even appreciate that you talk about stuff from before, because that's like any legitimate therapist, counselor, practitioner is going to say, yeah, a lot of times it's not the stuff that fire or dispatch hear about or go to or respond to. It's so much foundational stuff earlier in life, from childhood. It's a lot of why we do this job. So many people, I know it from working in this industry for so long, but in the hiring aspect, like there's a lot of people, something happened, something bad to them or someone close to them, which put them, wanting to be in this role. So, no, thank you for covering a lot of ground there and just really helping people understand that it's the opposite of, it really needs to be the opposite of what we shy away from. It should be absolutely just recognizing that we got to face the music and there's different ways to get there. And I'm glad you're able to find this new chapter.
Yeah. And I definitely still love that I can support, my friends who are still in law enforcement and, the police officers that I come into contact with every day. I can still support you. It's just going to be in a different way now. Mm-hmm. And I feel better about that. And I'm glad that I get to do the job I get to do. The change, the decision to make the change was tough, but now that I'm here and moving forward, I, couldn't be more proud of making that change and just recognizing that, like I said, could I have done it? Yes. But would I be happy at the end of it? Because that's really what we all look forward to, right? Is having that happy, healthy career and getting to retire and enjoy life after law enforcement or, dispatch or police, and putting myself in a position where I can do that, I think is going to be the best thing for me.
Yeah. And there's so many things, like so many ways you can help people. Fire is like probably one of the more obvious ones, but I mean, we had a couple really close buddies that left before Diego died. Mm-hmm. A couple buddies that went to the fire service. We've had several after you. One like in the final stages. So we'll talk about I'm sure on the show later. Yeah, and then one's popping up that is a hybrid public safety department out of state that, fire and cop. Yeah, so
best of both worlds, I guess.
Well, except for the fact that I think he had to go through like a full academy, a full fire academy mm-hmm. and EMS school and EMT and field training for kind of both for fire and police. And I'm like, when are you ever going to be done with training? So that's just kind of fun.
Yeah, I think about it now and I'm like, I don't want to go through any more probations. Yeah. I've had 3 probationary periods and I'd like to be done with probation for a while.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you made a good home. And so one focus I wanted to ask you was, what was it like? Because we talk a lot about the hiring process for police, but what was that like for fire in your experience?
It was relatively similar. We, on the fire side, when I got hired, we went through a speed interview at first, which is not necessarily typical for a lot of agencies, mm-hmm. but it was like you sit down, they ask you 5 questions, you've got 10 minutes to answer them, and then that determines whether or not you move on to an oral board. And so I think that was really the most different piece of the puzzle. The rest of it was relatively similar. I went through an oral board, and then I had a lieutenant's panel and a chief's panel. So I got to talk to a variety of different people on different levels. And then they also had me do a ride along, where I got to go for 8 hours and sit with an engine crew and go on their calls. 1, so I could see what the department was like. Yeah. And 2, so the guys could see how I was, kind of get a gauge of personality, the questions I ask, who I am as a person, and kind of gauge to see if that would fit in the department. And that was a really cool experience, only because, like I said, I'd seen it from the police side, but I hadn't seen it from the fire side. So getting, to sit in the engine and see how these calls actually work really kind of fueled and sparked that desire for me. Mm-hmm. And then, you have the medical, the physical, the sit down, meet with a therapist, psychological, and all that kind of stuff. And then you sign your conditional offer and they end up sending you to the academy, which is I think mine was 4 months long. So not quite as long as police academy. But then the same process, we kind of had, not necessarily an FTO, but it's the rest of the year-long probationary period where you go and you have a task book that you check off and make sure everything gets done. And then you get signed off and you get your black helmet, and here we are today.
Nice. Were you banned from watching TV as a probie?
Yes.
That's a thing, right?
It's a thing. You don't get to sit in the recliners. You don't get to sit in the TV room. You don't get to watch TV. I mean, you could set your stuff at the kitchen table and glance at the TV, but you don't get to actually sit there and watch it. So there's a lot that you do on probation as far as that goes.
You gotta earn your dues.
Yeah.
Damn, yeah.
Very much so.
Okay. And then with the, it's very similar to police. And so even the speed interviews are something that you're starting to see more in police departments. It's a quick feeler to, figure out if you have a wet rag, if you have a soul behind those eyes. I think a lot of it goes down to, have you done anything? Do you know anything about what we're doing here? Because it is a filter. So for those listening, if that's your breaking point and you're super nervous, that's what you got to practice first. It's just connecting with people and getting comfortable with that.
And I think part of that too is I went in a little bit different. I guess maybe the same way I went into the police interview was I didn't have anything to lose, right? I want you to know my personality, and I want you to know if I'm going to be a good fit at your agency. And if I'm not, that's okay. I'll keep trying. But I want you to know the real me and the things, who I am as a person going in there. And I went in with the thought of, I don't have anything to lose. Like, if I'm going to be a great fit, great. I want to be at this agency. If not, that's okay too.
Yeah.
I'll move on to the next one and we'll go from there.
I love that too. That's what helped me, and I've told versions of this, but that's what helped me as an entry level is, hey, every department's going to be different, and you recognize that with fire too, right? You get a different vibe, a different culture. You present you as you, and so the right fit will be there. Unless you're some people need to work on their ego and interpersonal skills, but absent that, if it's just a personality and a drive fit, no, just be you. People want to see a person, and you need to be okay with that. My first oral board I aced was a department I did not want to work for. I just figured I needed the reps, and I did not have a job, and so I didn't need to take that summer, that sunny summer day out at the lake. I needed to go to this interview and be responsible. But I went in and I was myself, and I was personable. I was making fun of myself. I like to think I have a decent humor, and that came out, and people were smiling on the other side of the table rather than any prior oral board where I was super rigid and it looked like they were scrutinizing me, and they probably were because I was robotic, and people can connect with that.
Yeah, I went into my oral board and I talked about riding the struggle bus as far as dealing with traumas and processing that stuff. And I remember one of my lieutenants specifically going, "What bus were you riding?" And I was like, "The struggle bus." I had a hard time. It was a moment, and I pushed through it, and here we are. But I wanted them to know that about me, right? I like to think of myself as, well put together and whatnot, but I do have things I struggle with, and I am going to be open about it.
Yeah.
I feel like that's, to change kind of that mental health stigma and culture, you really have to be open. And I've gotten to do that with my current department. I went in there and I said, hey, this is kind of my background, and here's these things. And I was super surprised at some of the guys that came up and said wow, I'm really impressed that you're open about it. And I'm like, well, why not? If I could help somebody not have to go through what I went through and kind of the little bit of shame and that kind of stuff that went through it, I'd love to do that. I'd love to say, everybody's got their stuff. Let's unpack it, or let's get you to a place where you can unpack it and move forward.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate, you coming on here because your story is very compelling. And, just for a first responder this many years, I've known you for a number of years, and also kind of being a girl dad. And I see the strength in you and how you own you with no reservations. I think that's how more people need to live. And certainly I would love that for my daughter. To pivot back to the test, I took is it called the CPAT? It's the physical aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I took that cold, and, I read it a bunch of times. I never went to a practice thing, but I just mimicked it by running up flights of steps. I was basically jogging up steps with 2 backpacks to get the 70 pounds of weight or whatever it was. It was awkward before today where they were rucking backpacks and things like that. I just kind of hoboed it and put a bunch of plates in, these old crappy backpacks. But in any case, I flew through the test just fine. And my experience was because I liked lifting. I liked circuit style training. My cardio was pretty decent. that it was fine. But did you find CrossFit to prep you extremely well for that, or did you practice the test? What was that like?
Yeah, so I think CrossFit does set you up for that. I think lifting in general or any type of physical activity will really set you up for it. I mean, of course, there is that added aspect of, when you put all your firefighter gear on. I think I have, an extra 70 to 100 and some odd pounds, depending on what it is I'm taking with me into a call. But the cool thing about the CPAT is if you go and you sign up to do a CPAT, they'll run you through a practice one beforehand, not necessarily the day of, but that was what was super instrumental for me. Is I went in there and they walk you through each and every station. You get to pick things up. You get to figure out how it works. You get to figure out what techniques are best for you. And then they run you through a whole practice one. And then a couple days later, you got to go back and do the actual thing. So it really gives you a good idea, right? You know exactly what to expect. You know how many minutes you need to be on the step mill. You know exactly, how far you have to do the dummy drag and all of the bits and pieces of that test. But getting to go and do them all individually and figure out what works for you takes a lot of the nervousness and hesitancy out of it. And so when you get there, it's go time and you know exactly what it is you're going to do. Yeah. So I think if you get the opportunity to, great, go do it. Otherwise, remember that the CPAT is weighted. It's, like you said, 70 pounds for the step mill and then carrying 50 pounds for the rest of it. So if you have the ability to toss a vest on or a backpack or something and start doing even daily activities with just that sheer amount of weight, that'll start to prep you for that.
Yeah. That's solid. And yeah, there's aspects like, you're carrying like a chainsaw, right? And you're using a sledgehammer and lifting a ladder, like raising it up, which as a house painter, I had no problem with. But no, for all the things that, I asked about CrossFit, and that's actually as a plug, because like a well-programmed CrossFit gym or trainer or program is fantastic, right? You're doing these more functional movements. You're climbing, you're doing farmer's carries, you're doing drags or sled work. That's all really functional. I love that the fire test is very practical in that way. Like these are things, you have to carry a chainsaw, you have to drag a hose, you have to drag a person or a dummy drag. So like you're saying, to figure out what works for you, based on your body mechanics, the person that we talked about earlier could grab that dummy, throw it over his shoulder and just like jog over that way. But someone else, lacking upper body strength that guy has, might be leaning in and kind of locking out the back and then just pushing, through the hamstrings, right? Just dragging it, right? A lot of leg work. And I wish that more police tests did things like that. I think that a certain number of push-ups is kind of dumb. It's not, there's no carryover. And if you have a wonky shoulder, you could absolutely do this job, but you're not going to be able to do push-ups without hurting yourself. So what are we gauging? But enough of a rant about that.
Oh man. And I will say doing the pike pull and all that, you know how much ceiling we pull on a fire? Man, get good at that, because that is the skill set you're going to want to have down pat.
Nice. I want to rewind back one point I did want to make. You're sharing about, in your interview process, you're talking about being on the struggle bus with certain things that you'd been through. And I love that the agency was so receptive to that. And I think that that's where we need to go. And unfortunately, we're not all the way there. I want to be on my high horse when this happens, but that I'm involved in our hiring now, I'm talking with candidates that got disqualified by another department because something, quote unquote, came up in the psych. And oftentimes I've found that it's very subjective, either by the doc or by the agency reading just the doctor's notes, right? They put a risk assessment, maybe it's a higher number, and maybe some agencies don't like that. But when you read the fine print, and a lot of it is just right there, it's someone had a hard time in their life and they went to talk to someone about it. They struggled, they recuperated, they found healthy practices, and they've been on the up and up for the last few years. I actually prefer to see that than a blank slate of nothingness, right? That you've never encountered any adversity and you've never been challenged in this way. You never had to question or resolve. I love seeing that. It shows to me someone that's resilient. I think more first responder agencies need to gravitate toward that rather than away. But until that happens, I guess agencies like mine and yours will have the benefit, because there will be hard times, there will be traumatic times, And with a candidate like that, I feel way more confident that they'll be able to put in their healthy practices that they've learned. When you talk about, fitness as wellness, things like that, how you process things, that you can go talk to someone, whether it's, your go-to family member or whether it's a professional, either or both. Like, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think you touched on that. It shows a lot of perseverance, right? I've come up to this challenge and I've struggled through it, but I've persevered and said, this is not going to stop me. I'm going to find a way around it. And here I am coming out on the opposite side, right? You learn a lot about, your previous coping mechanisms or how you would have handled things in the past and maybe how you need to do it a little bit differently moving forward. But it shows that perseverance and the willingness to confront a challenge head on and push past it. I still have my weekly standing therapy sessions and I'll openly talk about all that just because I know when things come up that I need to talk about them and process them. And those are challenges that I'm going to confront head on and deal with and push past. So I think you really are right about that. I would love to see somebody who says, hey, I had this challenge. Here's what I did. And here I'm at now. And instead of making that a disqualifier, say, great. I'm super proud that you did what you did. And that gives me a good, view of your character moving forward.
Yeah. Cause I would even venture to say that if there's some, kind of old school, and this, I'm totally like building a stigma here, but some old school traditional administrators that are like, oh, that looks risky. I don't like that. Well, think about honestly that peer group and how many people from their culture stigmatize, getting help, and how many lives suffered as a result, right? Personal lives, relationships, children, just familial stuff, connecting with your kids, making time, being intentional. These are the things, I feel like we got to beat the drum, because I believe we're in the generation where we're most impactful for those coming in, because we're kind of the cool kids, right? We're wearing these hats and they're looking at us for guidance. And if we're there to give it to them, then certainly they'll be set up well for success.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of a challenge there too of, look into your closet of things. And I'm sure you probably have something in there that's relatively the same or similar that you just haven't talked about. So instead of kind of, keeping that closed off, maybe say, okay, maybe this is a different way of looking at it or a different challenge, maybe just one that I haven't openly talked about. But everybody has those things. It's just, if you're willing to talk about them, you kind of, like you said, take that stigma away and you breed a new generation of people that go, oh, okay, that's okay. As long if I have the challenge and I confront it and I push past, then great.
Yeah, it's awesome. So we've covered a lot of ground. This is a very, dispatch not so much, but the other industries are very male dominated. And I talk a lot about these topics, right? I talk about in hiring, there's a national movement 30 by 30, which is to improve the hiring rate of women in law enforcement. And I've gotten to talk to a lot of, national leaders, women, who have a very strong opinion for that type of message. I talk a lot about my wife, about male dominated, corporate or startup world and what that's like. Did you have any takeaways as far as your experience, or things that would be helpful for those listening in, whether they're women, or how to interact in these types of cultures?
Yeah, it is both law enforcement and firefighting are still pretty male dominated fields. I actually, in my oral board for Kent PD, I had somebody ask me like, hey, you're being hired as, we're looking to hire you as a female in a male dominated career. Like, how are you going to deal with that? And I guess the best way to say is just, I was just me. I knew that my work would show for itself, my report writing, the way I went to calls and handled calls, and just doing what I thought was right and asking for help when I needed it. I never felt like I was lesser of an officer because I was female, because there were plenty of situations where I'd walk into and people would gravitate towards talking to a female officer because that's what they were more comfortable with. And we kind of talked about this a little bit beforehand when it comes to like DT or tactics, right? I'm a shorter in stature officer. I had to figure out how to do things a little bit differently, and that was okay. I just needed to realize that I wasn't 6'5" and didn't have the brute strength to pick a guy up and move him where I wanted him to go.
Mm-hmm.
I would have to use skills and tactics. And I was lucky enough to find a sergeant at the time who was also shorter in stature that said, yeah, that's not going to work for you, but watch this. And so just realizing that it was okay that I did things differently. I didn't have to do them the same as somebody else. I could still have the same end result, and just persevering that way, and then also remembering that it is okay to stand up for yourself in some situations. If you do get confronted with certain things, then being able to say, hey, I'm not comfortable with that. Let's change the attitude and move forward, right? Because there are some people that may have never worked with a female officer or a female firefighter before. When I came into my agency that I am at now as a firefighter, they hadn't worked with a female in 10 years. Like, we had some growing pains of just what were they comfortable saying around me? What was I comfortable saying around them? Mm-hmm. So there are some of those growing pains, and just giving grace and remembering that for the most part, everybody's got great intentions. You'll come across a bad apple or two, and you can address that and deal with it. But be you, be yourself, and work hard, because that's really, at the end of the day, what is going to be the legacy, or what you leave behind is, I worked hard, I did good, I put out good paper, I made good arrests, or, I put the effort in, and stand behind that.
Yeah, there's a lot of themes there that I love. And just to touch base for those unfamiliar, we're not talking about affirmative action. We're not talking about forcing hires. We're talking about you earn your spot, right? So that's in the hiring realm. That's in, as you said, prove yourself, right? So if you do have haters out there, just because they're like, oh, we hired a female firefighter, let's see. You're like, okay, yeah, we will see. You will see. I'll show you. And I love that. And in my own hiring experience, I failed my first oral board. I got 9th on my next one. I got 17th on my next one. And so to think even back then that it was about, doing well or getting hired because I'm Asian American, certainly not. No doors were opening when I sucked at interviewing, but when I got more comfortable and I got better, then a lot of doors are opening. And what changed? Just my skill, right, in interviewing and portraying myself or presenting myself. And so I think I also love that you talked about context, right? So it's not even about being female, but you're shorter than I am. So leverage and physicality is just going to be different. You're going to have a different pivot point and a different, a balancing, if it's a takedown, which is literally, we're talking about physics and math and a lot of math that I don't understand, but I know that the things that go into play, it's going to be different from someone that's 5'4", 5'5", or someone that's 6'2". And it's going to be different from someone that's 6'2" and $150 and someone that's 6'2" and 300 pounds.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And so just knowing the context and knowing the individual, and what I like about some of these conversations when people have the patience to hear out what it's about is just recognizing the power of having people from different experiences and different backgrounds. And that can be race, that can be gender, and that can be a lot of other things. But and I talked about this a little bit before, but early in my career, when a certain Asian family would see me respond and they'd get really excited and they would ask if I was Vietnamese or if I was Chinese or whatever, I almost denied it. I didn't want them to see me as different. I wanted to, and this was a lot of me growing up, I wanted to be seen as American, and I wanted to just be seen as a cop. I'm like, no, it's not any different that you get me versus Jenny versus, John, right? But I was essentially denying this point of connection where I think anyone that's been in this role for a while can recognize that there are some people that are going to be more comfortable talking to a male in a certain type of situation. There's some people that will be more comfortable talking to a female officer in a certain situation. And if that's a ready resource, that's awesome, right? We shouldn't go out of our way and force the thing. But I guess the last thing I'll throw out as an example is, earlier in my interaction as a hiring sergeant, I met a young Hispanic male, and he was really focused in, and he was very motivated by the fact that I was Asian and I had a rank. For him, that was a hope that he could ascend and be something, because he essentially didn't have any other role models that showed him that. And he made mention of that, and we talked about it a little bit. But I thought that was, in hindsight, that was really cool. Whereas as a young man, I think I would have kind of shirked it off, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I feel like I've kind of had a similar experience. And I teach CPR in our middle schools and high schools, and getting to kind of tell my story to a lot of those, young and upcoming minds is like, yeah, I was a 911 dispatcher and I was a cop and I'm a firefighter. Like, there's nothing that's going to keep you from doing what you want to do. I feel like in some instances I'm proof of that, put your head down, do the work, put the effort in, be good at what you do, and, doors will open for you. But you're right. If I'm actually helping at a girls camp, a girls firefighting camp for girls that are ages like 14 to 18.
Mm-hmm.
And so super cool experience to show them. And it's run by all females. So chiefs, anybody, showing skill set or anything, it's all done by females. And it's really cool to be able to show them, hey, if you have an aspiration to do this, it may be a male dominated field, but we can do it just as well as they can. So it's really a cool experience to get to show that and be kind of a, quote unquote role model in that aspect.
Yeah, I love that. That's so huge because I read a really good article by a retired lieutenant of Tucson PD, but Jen Moss, and she wrote about, and it was light in a lot of these topics we're talking about, but it actually highlighted some of the historical, I think the word she used was sabotage, of how women may advertently or inadvertently kind of sabotage others. And some of that's kind of protecting, some of that comes from a place of, hey, these were some obstacles, so I'm going to try to save you from that. Being really critical, we're often really critical of ourselves and people that remind us of ourselves. So I thought it was a really impactful article to read as a male, and just how I interact with my family and how I interact with my peers. But if that's of interest to you, check it out on Lexapol or Police One for the listeners. But I thought it was very informative.
Yeah, and I think that the kind of in that same female topic is, you're going to, as a female officer or male officer, you're going to make mistakes, right? And we're not putting you on this pedestal. But the biggest thing is that if you make that mistake, own it and move forward. I think that kind of goes for the whole, FTO and, any time in your career. But just remembering that those mistakes are going to come and you're going to make them and own them. Biggest part, owning them, and then don't make them again,
Yeah.
And they may hold you a little bit more critical because you are new or you're female or you should have known better, right? But we're all human. We're all going to make those mistakes. So just own it and move forward.
Yeah. And to close that loop, because I realized the way I said it might be kind of confusing, but the reason why I brought up that article was there are men and women in the industry and outside the industry that hear girls firefighting camp and probably roll their eyes, right? And that's what I'm speaking to is like, it doesn't involve you. Don't worry about it, right? If it bothers you, then like move on, right?
Look
because
away.
it's an amazing resource, it's an amazing engagement piece and mentoring piece. But some people, women included, just don't like that idea. But I would just encourage them just to let it go.
Yeah.
Just pay attention to something else.
And remember too, like if you haven't seen somebody that looks like you, is, your height, your shape, your stature, doing something, you don't necessarily know you can do it. So really, we're just getting out there to show girls that this is a viable option for us too.
Mm-hmm. It exists in every other industry. If you think about it, right? If you think about athletics, if you think about celebrities, movie stars, big time musicians, like it's a big deal when someone from a different walk or a different background comes into the light, and it kind of shakes the world and it shakes that culture, right? I haven't seen a prominent Asian country star, but it took some time until there were prominent Black or African American country stars. But look at how many we have now compared to 10, 20 years ago. And I love it. So I think that if we get outside of the lane we feel very personally about, and just think broadly, just recognize that there are these trends and there are these lack of role models in certain respects. And so to foster that can only be a good thing.
Oh, for sure.
Well, sweet, Jeni, we covered a lot of different topics. Is there anything else that you'd like to kind of close off with?
Nothing in particular. Just, thank you for having me and let me share my story. I love the fact that I get to talk about being in these different roles and the struggles that come along with them. And I, hope somebody can relate to my story and just know that when you're in those spaces, it's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to make a change. It's okay to do something that is going to make that other people might not understand, but makes your life better. And just be confident and do you.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that there's going to be a lot of people that will connect with every piece, because I think it's going to be extremely rare that someone wears all these hats and has the connection to the level where you've been able to allow others to connect to you. But I am confident that there's a lot of little things that are certainly going to be instrumental for someone. So I really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate knowing you. I appreciate working with you. And you're certainly a role model and a figure in our community.
Oh, thanks.
All right. Well, I'm going to leave it with that. And so, as a reminder to the listeners, please share the podcast, subscribe, give us the good ratings to help us reach more people. And we'll talk to you next time.